fix de-aia, pentru că acum o să urmeze finala la World Cup. Horrors of the World Cup. Noi ia să vedem. Ia să vedem despre ce e vorba. Mamă, uite câte videoclipuri, opa, câte videoclipuri interesante apar aici. România! Bă, România! România mentioned, ești prost? Ce-am făcut noi? Ce oroare s-a întâmplat la noi la World Cup? Că noi nici nu ne calificăm la World Cup. A, sau e Franța, cred că, nu e România. Numai că nu văd de la culori bine.
Every 4 years, the world stops. The FIFA World Cup is the most watched sporting event on Earth. Billions of people tune in. Hundreds of millions more fill the streets.
Coaie, dar proastă voce o ales în Eleven Labs, ești nebun? Găsește o voce mai bună, coaie.
Few weeks, football is everything. But underneath the spectacle, the goals, the flags, the tears, there has always been something else.
Ok. Știu că am fost și noi la World Cup, dar zic, nu, ce horror s-a întâmplat la noi? Nu cred că era România, nu cred că era steagul României.
It's September 1993, and the Colombian national football team is about to do something extraordinary. They're in Buenos Aires, Argentina's home ground, one of the most intimidating stadiums in world football. But Colombia does not seem to be intimidated by it. They score. Intimidated world football.
Stadioanele care au așa, scary as fuck. Bro, imaginează-ți să cadă toată tribuna aia de sus cu atâția oameni stau deasupra capului tău, atâția oameni stau. Și așa mare, nu știu, fără suport, fără nimic. Și sub-s oameni. Bă, scary as fuck.
But Colombia does not seem to be intimidated by it. They score. Then again.
Mamă, dar ce-i cu terenul ăsta? Joacă între meteoriți?
Then again. By the final whistle, it's 5-0. Argentina.
A fost un caz când s-a rupt tribuna. Ia. S-a rupt tribuna unui stadion. Nu vreau să arăt pe live oricum. Da, cred că trebuie să caut mai deep un pic. Credeam că mi-apare așa rapid.
Brea un local de tenoca la usina foto in book de sit weekly.
One of the greatest
Nu știu,
footballing
bro.
nations on earth have been taken apart on their own pitch. The whole of Colombia stops.
Chiar nu știu.
Pele, considered by many to be the greatest footballer of all time, watches on and says Colombia will win the World Cup. On paper, everything looks perfect. But Colombia in the early 90s was not a safe place.
Good evening. It's become a typical day in Colombia. 3 more judges have quit their jobs after being threatened by the murderous drug cartels. The government has imposed a curfew in 9 cities in the heart of cocaine country, including the cartel's capital, Medellin.
Medellin, the city at the heart of Colombian football, had a murder rate of 380.
Bă, o leacă mă enervează vocea asta aici. Pe voi nu vă enervează un pic, dar mă uitam la videoclipul ăsta că chiar sunt curios.
It was, by some measures, the most dangerous city in the world.
Well done. Sorprendidos por el ascenso sin precedentes que ha tenido Atlético Nacional en este torneo. Si gana hoy, será el primer equipo colombiano que se coronará campeón de Sudamérica.
The football was soaked in drug money. By the late 80s, Colombia's powerful drug cartels had found a great way to launder their profits. Pablo Escobar effectively controlled Atlético Nacional in Medellin. The Rodriguez Orejuela brothers, heads of the Cali cartel, ran América de Cali. Gonzalo Gacha owned Millonarios in Bogotá. It was never openly admitted, but everyone knew. This period became known as Narco Ball, and it made Colombian football extraordinary and extraordinarily dangerous. Anyone who tried to stop it paid a price. In 1983, Colombia's Justice Minister, Rodrigo Lara
Da,
Bonilla,
11 Labs, ceva 11 Labs, low budget,
began
rău de tot.
investigating the cartel's involvement in football
Free
clubs.
voice, ceva.
He was shot dead in his car in Bogotá shortly afterwards. In 1989, referee Alvaro Ortega officiated a match in Medellin. At some point during the match, a player scored what appeared to be an equalizer in the final minutes, but the referee Ortega disallowed it for dangerous play. An anonymous caller later told a radio station that Ortega had cost the chief bettors a great deal of money. He was shot 9 times outside his hotel that same evening. The entire Colombian league season was cancelled. No champion was ever declared. Anyone who fell out of favor with these men was at risk. In 1994, 5 years later, the world would also learn that the players themselves were no exception. Andres Escobar played as Colombia's central defender and was one of their most prominent players. Calm, measured, and
Ăsta e
deeply
frasul
respected.
Escobar, copilul Escobar.
In a
cine-i?
country where football had been dragged into the
Sau
orbit
numai
of
e
cartels
random
and
numele?
killings, Andres represented something different. He wrote a column for the newspaper El Tiempo, speaking openly about responsibility, about unity, and what football could mean for Colombia beyond the violence. They called him the gentleman of football. A few months later, he was on a plane to the United States. Colombia were at the 1994 World Cup, and Escobar was one of the most admired footballers in South America. Now the pressure on Colombia's squad was huge. The cartels had money riding on the tournament. Cartel bosses expected results, and they had ways of making that expectation felt.
Victorie 3-1 cu Columbia.
Bă! Am avut noi treabă cu ei? Hagi.
Columbia, mare favorită.
Colombia opened the tournament with a 3-1 defeat to Romania.
Bine, bă!
It was pretty unexpected, and it really hit them hard. And then, the messages started arriving. Before their second match, against the host nation, the United States, death threats were sent to the team hotel by phone, and even by fax. They were addressed to the coach, Francisco Maturana, and midfielder Gabriel Jaime Gomez. Francisco Maturana later admitted he'd received personal threats as well,
Crazy, bro.
basically being told which players had to be in the starting 11. So when Colombia walked out onto the pitch that day, the players knew exactly what was at stake, and that result was what eventually got them out of the World Cup. After the match, Escobar was urged to stay in the United States for a while, at least until things had calmed down back home. But he refused. He said he'd done nothing wrong. He had nothing to hide. He just wanted to go home. Before leaving, he even sat down to write one final column for the Colombian newspaper, El Tiempo. Life doesn't end here. We have to go on. Life cannot end here. No matter how difficult, we must stand back up. We only have 2 options. Either allow anger to paralyze us, and the violence continues, or we overcome and try our best to help others. It's our choice. Let us please maintain respect. My warmest regards to everyone. It's been a most amazing and rare experience. We'll see each other again soon, because life does not end here. On July 2nd, 1994, 10 days after the match, the news broke.
Îți dai seama să joci speriat că o să mori din cauza la cartel dacă nu câștigi meciul? Și îți dai seama, bă, în ce meci acum recent au făcut în Capul Verde? Nu, la Egipt, cred că Egipt. În ceva meci acum recent contra Belgia, parcă. Ceva Capul Verde contra Belgia sau o asta, au făcut fault cu aia în care au și-o dat penalti la Belgia în ultima secundă, în ultimul minut. Tu îți dai seama, omul ăla a faultat un jucător de la o echipă versus Belgia, dacă nu mă înșel. Și a fost penalti. Belgia cu Senegal, așa, bravo. Cu Senegal, da. Păi, tu îți dai seama, jucătorul ăla de era pe vremea aia Colombian și făcea asta? Hai de viață,
It was at 3:30 a.m. in front of this restaurant. 27-year-old Andres Escobar got into his car. He was surrounded and shot 12 times and killed.
According to witnesses, after each shot, the gunman shouted, "Goal!" Andres Escobar died in hospital that night. He was just 27. More than 120,000 people attended his funeral. A man named Humberto was arrested and confessed to pulling the trigger. He had worked as a driver for a man called Santiago, an alleged drug trafficker with cartel connections, who was said
A dat autogol, de-aia a
to
fost.
have lost a significant amount of money betting on the Colombia match. Humberto was convicted and sentenced to 43 years in prison. He served 11. Santiago and his brother Pedro, who were also at the scene that night, served 15 months for obstruction of justice. It is widely believed the prosecution was halted after bribes were paid to the prosecutor's office. The lead investigator later said he still wonders why his superiors shelved the case. In February 2026, 32 years later, Santiago was shot dead at a restaurant in Mexico. The case, in a way, never closed. Zaire, the country now known as the Democratic Republic of Congo, was the first nation from sub-Saharan Africa to qualify for the World Cup.
Bro.
Their president, Mobutu, was overjoyed. Mobutu had ruled Zaire since 1965 with absolute power. He used football as part of a broader program of national identity. And now his national team had qualified for the 1974 World Cup. He rewarded them lavishly. Each player received a house and a car. Mobutu's generals were reportedly so jealous that he had to buy them each a car as well, just to keep the peace. The players found out that the match bonuses they'd been promised, money they were counting on, had apparently been intercepted by officials linked to Mobutu's regime. The squad became so angry that they decided they wouldn't play the next match against Yugoslavia at all. In fact, even 2 hours before kickoff, they were still refusing to go out onto the pitch. Then the threat started.
Nu mă uit acum
The
astrol.
players were told that if they refused to play, they'd be sent to a dungeon. So they played and lost 9-0. It remains one of the heaviest defeats in World Cup history. What the world saw as a humiliation was, in fact, a protest. What the world saw
Ce-a
as a
fost asta?
humiliation was, in fact,
Ce-a fost
a
asta, bro?
protest. A deliberate capitulation by a group was, in fact, a protest. A deliberate capitulation by a group of men who had been robbed and threatened in the same breath. After the match against Yugoslavia, Mobutu reacted almost immediately. His presidential guards turned up at the team hotel. Journalists were kept out, and the whole place was effectively sealed off. Then the players were given a direct warning.
Mi-a zis pe live.
If they lost to Brazil by 4 goals or more, they wouldn't be allowed to go back home. Now, it is worth being clear about what not being allowed to return home meant in Mobutu's Zaire. Like I said, Mobutu ran one of the most brutal regimes in Africa, meaning political opponents were imprisoned, tortured, and executed. His secret police were feared throughout the country. The threat of exile was, in practical terms, a threat of total ruin. Separation from family, loss of livelihood, and the ever-present possibility of something worse. The players understood this. The match against Brazil on June 22nd, 1974, was always going to be difficult. Brazil were the reigning world champions. Zaire were exhausted, demoralized, and playing under the most extraordinary pressure any group of footballers has perhaps ever faced.
Sincer.
Brazil were 2-0 up. The Zaire players were doing everything they could to slow the game down, to run down the clock, to keep the score where it was. Then, late in the second half, Brazil were awarded a free kick. Rivellino, one of the finest players in the world, stepped up to take it. And then, something happened. Mwepu Ilunga broke from the defensive wall, sprinted forward, and booted the ball as far up the pitch as he could.
What the fuck? De ce a făcut asta?
Wall sprinted forward and booted the ball as far up the pitch as he could, before Rivellino had even struck it. The crowd laughed. Players looked at each other in confusion. The Romanian referee strode over.
Romania mentioned again.
And showed Mwepu a yellow card. Here is what Mwepu Ilunga actually said about it, in 3 separate interviews over 30 years, completely consistent. I did that deliberately. I was aware of football regulations. I did not have a reason to continue getting injured while those who will benefit financially were sitting on the terraces watching. I know the rules very well, but the referee was quite lenient and only gave me a yellow card. He wanted a red card, but he didn't get it. Brazil scored a third. The final score was 3-0, 1 goal short of the threshold. The players were allowed to go home. When the team finally arrived back in Zaire, they were driven straight to the presidential palace, where Mobutu was already waiting for them. Their passports were taken away, and they were banned from leaving the country. Mobutu also cut all funding to the national team. And from that point on, football in Zaire slowly collapsed. A lot of those players ended up spending the rest of their lives in poverty. Mwepu died on May 8, 2015, at the age of 66 after a long illness. He never got to see what happened next. 9 years after his death, the Democratic Republic of Congo qualified for the 2026 World Cup, their first appearance in 52 years. And when they finally stepped back onto the World Cup stage, they held Portugal to a 1-1 draw. Considering the quality of the Portuguese side, led by Cristiano Ronaldo, it was a huge result. And suddenly, people started believing this team could go much further than anyone expected.
Hello, I'm Leslie Salisbury, TV Times Hollywood editor.
And I'm Dave Lanning, TV Times sports specialist. And we're here to tell you about World Cup Plus on ITV and its special edition of TV Times with its pull-out guide to the players, the matches and the action coming your way on ITV.
It's 1976, and Argentina's military has just seized power in a coup. The sitting president, Isabel Perón, who inherited the role after the death of her husband Juan Perón 2 years earlier, is arrested. General Jorge Rafael Videla takes control. What follows becomes known as the Dirty War. The regime goes after anyone it considers a threat: students, journalists, trade unionists, political activists, anyone with suspected left-wing views. People are taken from their homes in the middle of the night, pulled out of university corridors, dragged off the streets, and many of them are never seen again. Some are even thrown from military aircraft into the sea, still alive, their feet weighed down with concrete. Estimates of those killed or disappeared during the Dirty War range anywhere between 10 and 30,000 people. And yet, just 2 years later, Argentina hosts the 1978 World Cup. Tens of thousands of foreign fans and journalists arrive, all stepping into a country right in the middle of one of the darkest chapters in its history.
16 teams with 77,360.
Just a few blocks away from the stadium where the tournament opened was a building called the Navy School of Mechanics. Between 1976 and 1983, around 5,000 prisoners were held there. They were tortured, interrogated, and in many cases, killed. Only around 150 are believed to have survived. Years later, one former political prisoner recalled lying chained up in his cell, listening to the crowd erupt as Argentina scored during the World Cup.
Crazy, bro.
At one point, a guard leaned down and whispered to him, "That's the last goal you'll ever cheer, you sons of whores." Videla understood exactly what the World Cup could do for him. For a few weeks, the eyes of the world were fixed on Argentina, but focused almost entirely on the football. And while people were watching what was happening on the pitch, far fewer were paying attention to what was happening everywhere else. At the opening ceremony, FIFA president João Havelange stood in front of the cameras, only a few kilometers away from where prisoners were reportedly being thrown alive from military aircraft into the ocean, and said, "Finally, the world can see the true image of Argentina." Argentina kept progressing through the tournament. The stadiums were packed, the ticker tape became iconic, and by most accounts, the atmosphere inside the grounds was incredible. But then came the match people are still arguing about decades later. Going into their final group game on June 21st, 1978, Argentina needed to beat Peru by at least 4 goals to knock Brazil out on goal difference and reach the final. Argentina ended up winning 6-0. They had already reached the required margin within 50 minutes. And almost immediately, suspicions started spreading. Brazil, who were now out of the tournament, were furious. Journalists began raising questions, and as the years went on, more details started emerging that people found difficult to ignore. In the days leading up to the match, the Argentine government had reportedly sent 35,000 tons of grain to Peru. Argentina's central bank also unfroze $50 million worth of Peruvian assets. In
2012, pentru că a făcut Argentina asta pentru Peru.
2012, former Peruvian senator Genaro Ledesma testified in a Buenos Aires court. He claimed a deal had been made between Peru's president and Videla. According to Ledesma, Argentina would be allowed to win by the margin they needed to reach the final, and in return, Videla agreed to take in 13 Peruvian political dissidents who had become a problem for Peru's government. Ledesma alleged that those 13 people were later imprisoned and tortured. Both Argentina and Peru have always denied that any arrangement existed. Several Peruvian players have also insisted the result was completely genuine, and the Argentine players themselves seem to have known very little about any of it at the time. In the end, no investigation ever reached a definitive conclusion. FIFA even considered opening one in 2012, but ultimately decided against it. There's one final detail about the 1978 World Cup that often gets overlooked. When the tournament came around, Johan Cruyff, the man who had led the Netherlands to the final 4 years earlier, and still right at the peak of his career, wasn't there. And what made it so strange was that there was no obvious reason for it. He wasn't injured, nor was he suspended. He simply didn't go. For years, Cruyff barely spoke about why. Then, decades later, the real reason finally became public. In 1977, Cruyff and his family were the victims of a kidnapping attempt at their home in Barcelona.
What the fuck?
Armed men broke into the house, and the experience left a lasting impact on him. After that, he no longer felt comfortable being away from his family for long periods of time, so he chose not to travel to Argentina. Cruyff also admitted he had political objections to Argentina's military regime, although at the time, he was careful about how openly he spoke about that side of it. Argentina went on to win the tournament, and just a few blocks away, the torture continued.
Crazy, bro.
Japan, Korea.
On December 2nd, 2010, FIFA president...
Bă, deci asta cu Argentina e de mult. Nu e doar de acum. Gen, lumea chiar are de ce să zică că e rigged. Faza asta cu Argentina. What the fuck?
Sepp Blatter opened an envelope on a stage in Zurich.
To organize the 2022 FIFA World Cup is Qatar.
The 2022 World Cup had been awarded to Qatar. Qatar is a country smaller than Yorkshire. It had no real footballing tradition to speak of. In the summer, temperatures regularly climb past 50 degrees Celsius, around 122 degrees Fahrenheit, far too extreme for outdoor sport at that level. And at the time, it simply didn't have the infrastructure you'd expect from a World Cup host. In the years that followed, criticism and scrutiny gradually increased as allegations and reporting around the bidding process began to surface. In May 2015, Swiss police stormed a hotel in Zurich at 6 in the morning, arresting 7 FIFA officials. Shortly after, the United States Department of Justice announced a 47-count indictment alleging widespread corruption, including bribes totaling around $150 million paid over 2 decades to secure broadcasting rights, sponsorship deals, and hosting votes. Sepp Blatter resigned just 4 days later, shortly after being re-elected for a 5th term. He denied any wrongdoing. But Qatar's hosting rights were never officially taken away, and in the end, the tournament went ahead as planned. To host a World Cup, Qatar had to build almost from scratch. 7 new stadiums, along with hotels, roads, a metro system, and a major airport expansion. And to build all of that, they needed workers. Hundreds of thousands of them. They came mainly from Nepal, India, Bangladesh, Pakistan, and Sri Lanka. Often men from rural, low-income backgrounds recruited...
Ne-am uitat mai de mult la un video despre chestia asta.
...through agencies and promised
ori ne-am uitat împreună, ori m-am uitat la XQC care au reacționat la un video despre chestia
decent
asta.
wages and better opportunities. But many arrived to find something very different. Qatar uses a labor system known as kafala. Under this system, a migrant worker's legal status is tied directly to their employer. In practice, that meant they couldn't change jobs without permission, and they couldn't leave the country without it either. Many also reportedly had their passports taken from them on arrival. They worked in extreme heat, and on some sites, access to drinking water was limited, and rest breaks were tightly controlled. And when workers died, and many did, the causes were often recorded simply as cardiac arrest or natural causes, without proper investigation, and with no compensation for their families. In 2021, The Guardian published an investigation estimating that more than 6,500 migrant workers from South Asia had died in Qatar since it was awarded the World Cup in 2010. One of them was Vinod Kumar from India. He had loved football since he was a child. His younger brother later said they used to play together in a park until it got too dark to see the ball. Vinod Kumar died while working on a construction site in Qatar. His family were given conflicting explanations. First, a workplace accident, then suicide. No clear cause was ever confirmed, and in the end, no one was held responsible. Qatar's official position throughout the years of construction was that the deaths were not their responsibility. The Supreme Committee, the body overseeing World Cup preparations, stated that only 3 deaths on stadium construction sites were work-related. Another 37, they said, were unrelated to the work itself. The families of those workers are still waiting for compensation. Qatar has rejected proposals for a dedicated fund to support them, and many of the deaths recorded as natural causes were never properly investigated, leaving families with no clear legal route to claim anything at all. Meanwhile, the tournament itself broke records. Massive viewing figures, high-profile matches, and one of the most dramatic finals in World Cup history. But underneath all of it, many of those workers' deaths were never properly investigated.
Insane, bro.
And most of their families are still waiting. I'll leave it there for today.
Bă, mi-a plăcut videoclipul ăsta, chit că au avut voce AI.